Welcome to Wednesday night online Bible study for June 23rd, 2021 at First Baptist Church Macomb. Tonight, via Eyewitness Bible Study, we're going to look at the rest of the wisdom literature we haven't tackled yet. That would be Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. Because we've already looked at the Psalms and Job to some extent. Those are the other two generally considered to be wisdom literature. A few things, I'm going to follow their script for a change, and let me just do this to present what they're trying to do. It says, many people attribute Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and most of Proverbs to King Solomon. Okay, if you've been following in this, you know my opinion and the opinion of many scholars, so I don't really know how they got many there, but okay. Possibly this stems from 1 Kings 4:32, which says about King Solomon, he spoke 3,000 parables and his songs numbered 1,005. He was known worldwide for his far-reaching knowledge and wisdom. Proverbs 1 and 10, those specify that they were written, they're Proverbs of Solomon. I'm not going to go into how literature was done in that day and whether it could have been Solomon or not. I'll let you resolve that yourself. And, Proverbs 22:17, believe it says about the many sayings of Solomon, and that's where a lot of this comes from. There are many themes that run through Proverbs, including the importance of wisdom, the folly of adultery and prostitution, the value of family relationships. Since Solomon likely violated many of these, not to mention David, his father, it would be incredibly interesting to know at which point in his life each proverb was written. That's the tricky part. If you want to nail this to Solomon as writing all of this stuff, which makes it easier to talk about, when was he writing it? Was he writing it when he was really wise? Was he writing it when he had 700 wives? Which one was he doing? Ecclesiastes, on the other hand, is commonly attributed to Solomon, although the text itself says it was written by the teacher. The main message is that all of life is meaningless or insubstantial because death takes everybody to the same zero level. Most of the book is narrated by a third person who is talking about themselves as being the teacher. Toward the end, the voice changes to that of the teacher so that many kind of think it's Solomon, and I let you resolve that. I do want, just so you don't think everything's so foolish and vain, spoiler alert, end of the book of Ecclesiastes, you get your conclusion, which sounds very similar to the end of the book of Job. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, starting at verse 13. It says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And that's how it kind of finishes up. They say, as they carefully dodge this subject, as almost all of us who are ministers dodge this subject, they say Song of Songs, or Solomon's Song of Songs, or in some older translations. Because remember, the titles at the top of the book, your footnotes, those are not the inspired word of God. Your little, headings for each section, those are not the inspired word of God. So sometimes it's called Song of Solomon or Solomon's Song of Songs. It's a love poem, speak English, a love poem voiced through three people, a he, a she, and some friends. The he is clearly someone of royal descent in some way, has some power and authority. The she is the fiancé, it appears, based on the language. And because of the awkwardness of that and some of the language that is used in that, many people read this as an allegory of God and the Israelites or Jesus and his church. My only interjection to that, because they're going to pretty much dodge this in the video, is anytime you run to a text and are not sure what it meant originally in the Old Testament and your only conclusion is, well, this talks about Jesus, one, based on the sermon series we're in, you sound foolish to people who aren't in the Christian club. And two, that means you can make anything sound that way because you don't have a platform to start with. So when you're finding a prediction of Jesus under every rock in the Old Testament, that's dangerous. There is some validity to this. I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm just trying to say I would not want to base my faith and my view of a biblical book on something that's, quite frankly, as shaky as that. You're going to hear from a son of Korah, which I think is an interesting choice for them to use when looking at the book of Proverbs. The sons of Korah may or may not be familiar to you. The sons of Korah were the ones, they are obviously descendant of Korah. Korah is the one who rebelled against Moses. And if you rebel against Moses, you pretty much should have an idea how this is going to turn out. You can read that in Numbers 16 and 17. It doesn't go well. And I believe, as the video presents, which is an argument point, that no one survived at the line of Korah. But then we have in the Proverbs sons of Korah. And whether that's literally a son of Korah or that's someone who has the spirit of the son of Korah and tries to reflect upon that, I'll let you kind of resolve that. Other things that I think get glossed over a little too quickly. What's the purpose of wisdom literature? Wisdom literature is to give us to those day-to-day practical things that we're supposed to do. It's when people like me, who are more skilled at this, they go, now, how do you practically deal with your emotions? How do you practically deal with your family situation? How do you practically deal with that? Not the big picture theological things, but how do I deal with that? Because that was wisdom. They had the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. They had a lot of these books we've already looked at. But there's a section of just wisdom. I mean, I often joke about, I don't think it was original to me, maybe original to my wife, that Proverbs are the fortune cookie of the Bible. They may have some wisdom, but they're just kind of quick things and moving on. Like in my one-year Bible, looking at, let's see, June 22nd, Proverbs 17:22 reads, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." And that sounds like it could be a U.S. fortune cookie. I get that. But then the very next verse, which in my one-year Bible you read today, June 23rd, it says, "A wicked man accepts a bribe in secret to pervert the course of justice." Now, neither of those are incorrect. Neither of those are impractical. They're proverbs. They're more than just verbs. They're encouraging us to think and apply the wisdom that we have. And just to reflect. Now, as almost anybody who wants to fight the battle that Solomon wrote almost all these Proverbs and wrote all of Ecclesiastes and wrote all of Song of Song, is how can someone who was so wise write about things and make so many bad decisions? That's something I'll have to let you resolve. The sons of Korah, I believe it's going to be mentioned. I need to find it. They're given credit, whether they're a literal group or a figurative group. They're given credit in most biblical texts for writing Psalm 42. Psalm 42 should sound fairly familiar to you. "As the deer pants for streams of water, my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for you, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God?" Then immediately, those of you familiar with that song, "As the Deer Pants," we need to remember in this literature of wisdom and poems, the next verse says, "My tears have been my food day and night." When you read wisdom literature, especially wisdom literature in the Old Testament, because a lot of James is considered wisdom literature, you need to think about who's writing it, why they're writing it. This is brilliant and wise, but you need to consider the context, because if we fail to do that, we fail to really listen. I want to make sure I've given you everything you need to know before the video starts. I'm grabbing my notes just to do this. I've kind of implied I don't think Solomon wrote most of this, but I'll let you resolve that yourself. Something real obvious, and I'm sorry I'm doing this to you. Proverbs chapter 1. Just plain and simple. Also, you're here tonight where the proverb, and it is considered a proverb, that part's not a trick. Moderation in all things came from. But the beginning of the book of Proverbs, just like the Psalms were pieced together, the book of Psalms were pieced together in books, The Proverbs are pieced together this way, and this is the beginning, and it tells us what a proverb's for. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple knowledge and the discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. For biblical purposes, a proverb are sayings and riddles of the wise that if we could gather and listen to, our lives would be so much better. I'm going to turn it over to the son of Korah and let him swing from there, and then I will come back.
Who are the most famous poets of all time? A brief look at the internet would suggest that Shakespeare, Yeats, Homer, Dante, and Frost would make the list. Edgar Allan Poe, Maya Angelou, William Blake, certainly. King David, who lived more than 3,000 years ago, is more widely read than all of those poets put together. But he seldom makes any famous poets list. Maybe if instead of psalms, he called his works poems, things would have turned out differently. King David is famous for his psalms. My brothers and I are not so famous, though we wrote at least 11 psalms, some of which you'll most likely recognize. One of our best lines? Psalm 42, verse 1. As the deer pants for water, so my soul pants for you, O God.
Solomon is reputed to have written much of the book of Proverbs, as well as Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs. These poetical books give wise insight into the nature of God and the needs of mankind.
My brothers and I are the sons of Korah. A good student of the Bible would instantly be wary of that statement. One of our distant grandfathers was Korah, a priest who led a rebellion against Moses. In punishment, God had the whole earth swallow Korah and those associated with him. It seems obvious from the account that Korah's family would have died too, and there would have been no descendants. However, the Bible specifically states later that Korah's sons did not die. 7 generations later, the prophet Samuel arose from the line of Korah. Our clan were doorkeepers and custodians for the tabernacle. We were expert warriors under King David, and we became leaders of the choral and orchestral music in the tabernacle. We were also important in the ceremonial services when the tabernacle was brought to Jerusalem by King David. We are living proof that you can overcome the misdeeds of your ancestors. We were expert musicians, psalmists, and poets. It was only natural that we would continue to be in charge of all things having to do with music, psalms, and poetry under King David's successor, Solomon. Solomon was a pretty good poet. He actually makes a few of the internet's best poets list. One of his longer poems is in the Bible and is often titled The Song of Songs or The Song of Solomon. It is a love poem between a man and a woman who are not yet married. Solomon wrote many love poems, but this is the only one that survived through the centuries. My brothers and I joke he had to write a lot of love poems. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. In a way, that poem reflects the life of Solomon as he aged. The poem has nothing to do with God or his covenant with Israel, nor is it concerned about wisdom. Instead, it celebrates a sexually charged relationship between two lovers. Frankly, the love poem's nothing special, but many people have found analogies in it. Some see it as an allegory between God and Israel. Others see it as an analogy between Christ and his bride, the church. Another of Solomon's poems is also found in the Bible. It's usually entitled Ecclesiastes, which means teacher or preacher. He wrote this long poem when he was old and a bit cranky. Solomon realized too late how poorly he had lived and felt like life was futile. Well, it is futile when you disobey God to the extent that he did. When Solomon wrote the poem, he could barely remember what it was to be wise, but he still recognized the value of wisdom. He could barely remember what it was to be faithful to God, but he still recognized God's power. There's a lot of wisdom in Ecclesiastes, but be careful in applying it to your own life. Remember, he wasn't the wisest man in the world when he wrote it. Be aware that there are musings. Use wisdom with musings such as, everything is meaningless, or the conclusion that the wise and the foolish both meet the same end, death. Although there's no clear structure to the poem, it explores themes such as figuring out what is good for people to do while they live, what meaning, if any, is there in life, and what comes after life. Ecclesiastes does provide modern people with a paradox. It does try to explore some of the deeper thoughts in life. In opposition to that, modern life often consists of asking a voice-controlled computer intelligence to provide facts for shallow questions. Just jump to the end of the poem and read, "Here's my conclusion about everything. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of all. For God will judge every word and deed, including the things that appear to be hidden, to see if it is good or evil." A decent poet, yes. But that wasn't Solomon's best literary tool. Solomon was the best ever at Proverbs. Proverbs are these short words of wisdom-type sayings that are clearly applicable to everyday life. He wrote 3,000 Proverbs, although only a fraction of those are recorded in the Bible. People loved his Proverbs and wisdom. They came from all over the world to hear him speak them. The book of Proverbs contains Proverbs from Solomon and other wise people. One of the best things about the book of Proverbs is you can find a proverb that fits nearly every situation. I mean, what parent or preacher doesn't have the need to quote, "Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but whoever hates to be corrected is stupid." You can't read even a few proverbs at random before you find something that applies to your own life, or something you want to text to one of your friends. Well, my friends anyways. Another thing about Proverbs that many people like is that Solomon didn't pull any punches. He didn't avoid any subjects in order to be politically correct or sensitive to people's feelings. After all, he was king. He could say or do whatever he wanted. And he was smarter than everybody else, so who was going to challenge him? He talked about the dangers of adultery, the value of wisdom, how to discipline children, the silliness of drunkenness, and the waste of ignorance and immorality. The book opens up with its purpose. It is to be read to gain wisdom and understanding, to learn how to behave prudently, and to do what is right, just, and fair. It is for the wise and for the foolish who wish to be wise. Its opening section concludes with this famous line: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Here are a few proverbs that might not go over so well in your society today, but they're still on point. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't count on your own understanding. You destroy yourself if you commit adultery. Laziness causes poverty. Also, whoever trusts in riches will fall. We sons of Korah were very sensitive to the fact of being wise and foolish. After all, our family is famous for our foolish ancestors. Through the generations, we have overcome that reputation. But we know we're only 1 or 2 decisions away from losing that reputation. Even if King Solomon chooses not to follow his own words, we will search them, we will weigh them, and we will do our best to act wisely. Solomon's Proverbs are not commandments from the Lord, but they are time-tested to be excellent guidelines for living a godly and productive life. If he had followed his own Proverbs, he and his people would have been much better off. How much better off are you? Let's see. I'll give you some famous lines and you'll tell me if they're in Psalms or Proverbs or not. Moderation in all things. Nope, Aristotle promoted that. A rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. Nope. Shakespeare wrote that. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus said that, but it's not in Proverbs or Psalms. Spare the rod and spoil the child. No, but Solomon wrote some things pretty close to that. To thine own self be true. No, Shakespeare again. Hamlet. The Lord works in mysterious ways. A coffee mug. It comes from an old hymn, but it's not in the Bible. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. Yes. Yes, indeed. The internet's unrecognized poet, King David, wrote that.
As you can see, hopefully, I'm back. There's lots of different ways to include this because there's a lot of information being thrown at you there, and I just want to give you the idea of wisdom literature and thinking that way. I'm going to read from Proverbs chapter 6, a text that is familiar to some. I'm going to start at verse 16. And then I'm going to ask you a question. It's going to conclude our Bible study for tonight. So it's not going to be deep and insightful. It's just going to be, hey, what do you think? Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 reads, "There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him," which is the standard Jewish poetry method, so don't worry about their math. "Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises evil schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers." Those are the 7 sins. If you want to make them the 7 deadly sins, that's fine. The question is, when we study the book of Proverbs, why is that in there? What did it mean to the people it was originally written to? And does it still matter to us today? I'm going to let you reflect on if we followed that advice and didn't do those things, whether we were believers or not, how much better our life would be. There is value in the book of Proverbs. There is value in the book of Ecclesiastes. There is value in the book of Song of Songs, even though we struggle with some of the sexual images and is this an allegory? Is this not? There's value in there. But much like many of us who have studied under incredible, spiritually mature, knowledgeable, brilliant men and women, sometimes you just have to listen and wait for the nuggets or the proverbs or the little things they say that'll change your life forever. It's all written down. It's all there. We just need to read it. Because we know that the reason we struggle to be followers of Jesus is often not a question we don't know what to do. We read it and we fail to do it. Ministers included. So we'll reflect and see the value of Proverbs, and I think we'll find the value is good. Let me close this session in prayer. Holy God, thank you for these words that have been copied and treasured and written down and sung and presented and tried to give us some context. Thank you for that. But most of all, thank you that you are the source of wisdom. And though many of these words, these proverbs, the writing of Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, they may be wise sayings or puzzles that are hard for us to embrace, help us to see that it's worth the effort. And that if we could just embrace some of the truth, we'd be so much better for it. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Next week, I believe we get to see how many times I can mispronounce the words Rehoboam and Jeroboam as we have the outcome of Solomon's kingdom. And if you were here last week, it's not good. But it's one of the standard images of history that we use when we teach young people how to make good decisions. That if many of us had been taught this originally, we'd be a lot better off. See you next week. Thank you so much for being a part.